Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between Michael K Vaughan and myself, in which we combine the forces of Stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comics on which we have wasted our youths. And because this started out as a feature on Mike's channel and I horned my way in, he gets to pick what we talk about. And although we have talked a lot about Marvel's Epic collections, the whole point of this, the whole origin point of this, and we will talk about many more, there are so many Epic collections we haven't talked about. It would take us forever just to go through them all. Although we started out that way, we have branched out from there and talk about all sorts of other things, particular runs on particular titles, particular characters, and also some conceptual ideas. And this week, Michael K. Vaughan has a conceptual idea. He wants to know, are traditional floppy, stapled, single-issue comic books doomed? Are we living in the era that will see them cease publication? This is a natural question to ask because their circulation is smaller than ever. Their numbers, their sales figures, first of all, are heavily guarded by the industry, where they used to be public, and also predictably abysmal. In a time and in a cultural moment where that ought not to be true. The top, 3 highest-grossing movies of all time were comic book movies. Until just recently, and we will be getting to that, they were a reliable license to print money. You would think that were down to the comic shops. And yet it's not true. They're limping along. Flagship titles, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, the Justice League, are either not currently in publication or they sell 2,000 issues. I'm not talking about the number they say that the companies say they ship. That's the number they release. That's what they ship. I'm talking about what they sell. And there you have to piece the story together yourself from individual comic shops. And it's abysmal. You do the math, it's abysmal. It's once upon a time in the 70s and the 80s, if a Marvel or a DC comic book sold less than 60,000 a year, or 60,000 issues a month, the company would start to wonder, what's going on here? Do we need to shake this up? Maybe change the creative team? If it sold fewer than 40,000 issues, well, then it was on the chopping block. And there was no such thing as carrying a comic if it regularly sold under 20,000 issues. 20,000 issue sales in a month now for a Marvel or DC comic would be considered a runaway hit. That's the index of a dying industry. And so the question becomes, not only will the industry just go on all the way and die, but also why it got this way. Why did it get this way? What changed? And I isolate 3 factors. And I want to go over them with you in making a vain attempt on my part not to rant. I want to go over 3 factors that have led in their own way, the first 2 are not definitive, but have led in their own way to the state of floppy comics for sale. Just the latest issue of, the Crimson Avenger. The first of those elements, I know you'll be shocked, is the Stanley Virus. This is something I've talked about on my channel on Epic Comic Wednesday many times. Stan Lee in the 1960s introduced the Stanley Virus into comics, which introduced 2 concepts that don't have any place in superhero comic books. One is continuity, where what happened to the characters in issue number 14 is an outgrowth in some way of what happened in issue number 13 and 12 and 11 and 10. Hey, remember when? Or I won't do this because of something that's not in this issue. Continuity was introduced, and also verisimilitude was introduced. Where Stanley came up with the unbelievably insane idea that verisimilitude should exist in comic books about characters who turn into giant green irradiated hulks. There is no verisimilitude in superhero books. In any case, those 2 elements, those 2 components are the DNA and RNA of the Stanley virus. Continuity and verisimilitude. Stanley introduced that virus and it took off. I'm not saying it's not a valid way to tell a story. Of course it is. And it took off. Fans loved it. Readers loved it. It wasn't their parents' comic book. It wasn't the comics that their parents had taken into foxholes in France. This was something different. This was more akin to a soap opera, which had taken off just about at the same time. So probably no coincidence. It's a very valid way of telling a story. I don't believe that it's valid for comic books, but nevertheless, it took off. It became enormously popular. So much so that it leapt the blood-brain barrier from Marvel Comics to DC Comics, the home of real superheroes. And suddenly, continuity and verisimilitude were the watchwords of the industry. Now, I'm not going to rant about whether or not they have any place in comic books. They obviously don't, but well, I'm not going to rant about that. Instead, I'm going to pose the obvious question here. If you do that, if the Stanley virus infects superhero comic books, what is the natural result of that? The natural result of those two things, the marriage of continuity and verisimilitude, what is the natural result of that? The result is that the payoff is greater the more you are up on the title. The longer you've read it, the more you remember, the more weight each new development in the continuity is going to have for you. Which means, although no one saw this at the time, and a couple of people did, one particular writer at Marvel did, some people saw it, most people didn't, and it wasn't a problem at first. But it is inevitably a problem, because if you introduce that virus into your comic book world, it's going to mean that the books are going to get more and more rewarding to longtime fans, and less comprehensible to people who aren't longtime fans. If you have the Stanley virus, if you care about verisimilitude and continuity, well, continuity and verisimilitude together mean that if a character is traumatized by Event X in issue number 10, and then something like Event X returns in issue number 30, the writer is going to pay that full homage. A Stan Lee-infected writer is going to pay that full homage. But what's a newcomer going to make of that? I didn't read that issue. I'm just starting on this comic. It seems like there's something I need to know. There seems to be something that I need to know here that I don't know. Okay, so Mantis seems to be in love with the Vision, but he's an android. Can he even be in love with anyone? And he seems like he's in love with the Scarlet Witch, but the Swordsman seems to be in love with Mantis, and he's also on edge around the other Avengers, almost like they have a history with him. Oh, wait, they do? Oh, okay. All right, so they do? So what's that history? I don't know. I wasn't following. I don't know what's going on here. And the writers, because they are writing more and more to the fans who are up on the issues, are spending less and less time filling you in. So, one unavoidable eventuality of the Stanley virus is that the books will become more and more refined for people who are in the know, for fans, as opposed to casual readers. For a long time, for 50 years, comic books did have casual readers. They had more casual readers than they had fans. In the I would have to research this, of course I can't remember it on my own, but in the late 1950s, no one would have thought of being a comic book fan. What does that mean? No, you're a fan of the Red Sox. You're not a fan of Captain Marvel Jr. Sure, you like reading his comics, but that's it. You pick up the latest issue where scruffy, lame newspaper salesman Freddie Freeman encounters a problem in that issue. Something seems wrong with old Mr. Johnson. Is he being blackmailed? Freddie, of course, can't help. But when Freddie says his magic word, he turns into a gorgeous, muscular teenager version of himself who's not lame, who is superpowered, and who's dressed in skin-tight blue leotards. Captain Marvel Jr. can certainly get to the heart of things. He has infinite strength. He can fly. He's totally invulnerable, no matter what you do. There's no drama in the Captain Marvel Jr. side of the story. The drama, because he is unopposable. The drama comes from Freddie Freeman. Okay, so let's say, just for hypothetical, that you're in some small town in the American Midwest, and let's say for purely artistic reasons, maybe the artwork, you like to read the adventures of a gorgeous muscular teenager in the skin-tight blue spandex. Well, then you'll buy the latest issue of Sensation Comics or Captain Marvel Jr. or whatever, and you'll read that adventure, and it'll be nifty. I didn't see that coming. Well, I didn't see that coming. And then you'll get some jokes and a puzzle. You'll get a whole bunch of ads. You'll get 2 backup features. One featuring one lame-ass character that nobody cares about, and one featuring another lame-ass character that nobody cares about, and that's what you get for your 10 cents. And when you're done with it, you're done with it. The pigs eat it, your dogs tear it to pieces. Maybe if it's particularly good, maybe you set it aside. Maybe you like to sketch, so you set aside some things to copy them, and maybe that issue hangs around for a while. But you're not a fan. You wouldn't call yourself a fan. And neither would anybody else at the spinner rack at the dry goods store. They might just like the look of the cover. Oh, look at this. He's punching Hitler. Okay, I'll buy that. Just add that on with, I've got, a length of rope. I've got all of these canned goods. Add this on. That'll be fun. I'll bring that home. You don't keep it because it's functionally interchangeable with all the issues that you saw before it and all the issues that'll come after it. There's no reason for you to hold on to it. That was true for 50 years. And comic books were everywhere. They were at newsstands. They were at that spinner rack at the dry goods store. They were everywhere. Once the Stanley Virus took over, and those comics weren't just, I'm just going to pick this up because I like the cover. You open it up after you've spent whatever the ungodly price is, 75 cents, the cost of a meal at a restaurant. Once you've spent the ungodly price, you open it up and think, oh, what? It says part 4 at the top. What does that mean? I don't recognize anything that's going on here. What's going on? This was a waste of time. This was a waste of my money. Now, every once in a while, someone who picks up one of those issues would say, this looks fairly interesting. I'm going to see if maybe the dealer has the earlier issues. It's going to be weird to him to ask. Nobody goes in and asks for, Life magazine from 4 months ago, but I'll do it. I'll see if maybe it's possible. You do start to attract those kinds of readers. I'm not saying that this is an invalid. I'm not saying this is a mistake. That the Stanley Virus is a mistake. But it's not a mistake from a storytelling or even a business point of view. It locks in a customer base. And the second factor that I want to talk about was a natural outgrowth of that. The more a new issue of the Crimson Avenger that's on the newsstand or the checkout stand at the supermarket, the more incomprehensible that issue is to the general reader, the more important it is that it be satisfying to the specialist reader. Gradually, if you are the powers that be at Marvel and then the infected DC, you realize that you don't have the general reader anymore. Every once in a while, somebody will start an issue. Every once in a while, you'll have a first issue, Conan #1, and you'll get a whole bunch of people that saw it and got in at the ground floor, so to speak. But more and more, the letters that you're getting by the hundreds every month, the sales figures that you're taking in, more and more, it's those people that are following the continuity, that are appreciating the verisimilitude. They're the ones who are buying these issues. The second factor that I want to talk about is a natural outgrowth of that, which is the direct market. I want to say suddenly. I'm sure it wasn't suddenly. To me, it seemed suddenly because I was out of the country. Let's just say for the sake of it, suddenly. Suddenly, those comics weren't on the spinner rack. They weren't at the dry goods store. They weren't at the magazine rack. They weren't on the newsstand that you passed. You passed 6 of them in one long block in New York City. They aren't there anymore. But once upon a time, newsstands used to be absolutely common. And the comics used to be there. And they aren't anymore. Suddenly, they aren't anymore. Instead, they're being sold directly to specialist comic book shops, who are the only places who have them. Every once in a while, over the ensuing decades, a major publisher or a major bookstore would work out a deal for a little while. For instance, when I worked at Barnes & Noble, we were selling comic books on the newsstand. But those deals always fall through. And instead, the sales go direct to comic book shops, specialist comic book shops, which started to pop up like toadstools. In late 80s, all through the 90s, they started to pop up like toadstools. There are 2 benefits to that. There are 2 outcomes of that second factor. One is that suddenly you're not even tempting the general reader who had not thought about buying a comic book today. You're not even tempting that general reader because they're not seeing the comics. They're not going to a comic book shop. Only the fans are going to a comic book shop. But the fans that are going to the comic book shop are getting concentrated temptation. You are making bigger fans out of them. They are spending more money than they would have spent on this fun hobby of theirs. If you just see Crimson Avenger and Whiz Bang and Captain Marvel Jr. plus a whole bunch of comics that you don't like, Daffy Duck or Little Lulu or whatnot, if you see those along with Field and Stream or Sports Illustrated at some newsstand and you're on your way from point A to point B, you won't be as tempted as you will be if you go to a comic shop and get surrounded by all the gems of Araby, by all these piles of goodies that you already like because you're already a bought and paid for niche customer. Okay. If your Stanley Virus has shrunk your potential readership to people who already like verisimilitude and continuity, and if the market then creates a concentrated place where they can go to get your product, those very people, that's a kind of equilibrium. right? That's a kind of equilibrium. That is sustainable. That it's not as healthy as appealing to everyone, but you can't appeal to everyone if you're infected with the Stanley virus. Over time, usually a very little time, you're going to appeal more and more only to people who know the story, who know what's going on. If you're not going to appeal to them anymore, then the perfect equilibrium balance is we're going to appeal to a niche market, and they're going to sell in a niche place. It's going to be a place where people go knowing they're going to buy comic books. Okay, that's a kind of continuity. That is sustainable. I might not be the biggest fan of the Stanley Virus, although I am, as you've seen on Epic Comic Book Wednesday, a huge fan of some of the products of the Stanley Virus. But I can recognize that that will work. And that brings us to the third factor that we want to talk about. If you have that scenario, that equilibrium, okay, we have been infected by the Stanley Virus, so we only appeal to people who are keeping up with what we're doing and believe it's real. Yes, believe it's real. And in answer to that, we have created this specialist venue where those people can go to buy what we sell. If you've got that equilibrium, you know one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt, which is that your entire industry is based on those committed customers. You are no longer even being visible to uncommitted customers. You are no longer even visible at the newsstand at Dodger Stadium, where once upon a time, Wiz Comics would sell 100 issues a game. They're not even seeing, the kids at that game, first of all, the kids aren't going, but the kids at that game aren't even seeing your comics now. So you know that. That's one thing you know for absolute certainty. So if you were at the beginning, let's say the first decade, the end of the first decade of the 21st century, what would be the one thing that you absolutely under no circumstances should do if you are the comic book industry? What is the one thing you absolutely must not do? You must not antagonize that core group of niche readers. There aren't any other readers. You've seen to that. There aren't any other readers. So the one thing you must not do is alienate that core group. If you alienate that core group, what will happen to your industry? It will die. It will tank, linger for a little while, and then die. For one main reason. We've seen a version, a corollary of this main reason on this channel when I talk about books. When I talk about books, the main reason is phrased as, there is no alternate canon. And there isn't one. There is no such thing as a big, brilliant, vibrant, diverse canon that has been suppressed by me for the last 7,000 years. There is no alternate canon. If we shift that admonition to the subject at hand today, the obvious realization here that you should prevent you from making this decision is that there is no alternate audience. You have ensured that there is no alternate phantom audience just waiting for you to get the bad people out of the way so they can buy your enlightened comic books. That audience does not exist. It's not that it's out there and has been poorly served. It does not exist. You don't have a backup core audience. So that's what you would know for sure. If you were in that situation, you would know the one thing we must not do is alienate our core audience. Guess what happened? In the second decade of the 21st century, guess what happened? That's exactly what the comic industry did. Now, they weren't alone. They weren't alone. There is a religious madness, a Christian religious madness, that has overtaken, let's say the United States. Let's keep it to the United States. That's where all these things originate, and they lap outward from there to all other countries. In the United States, a religious fundamentalist movement has taken over a huge part of society, more than most people think. And it has definitely taken over the business world, which will use boardroom euphemisms like DEI or greater fairness or greater inclusion. But it's really fundamentalist Christianity. It's a mission from God. You're on a mission from God. Which is why you don't care whether or not you live or die. It's why you don't care whether or not anyone else lives or dies. And it's why you certainly don't care about anything as tawdry as profits and losses. You're on a mission from God. You're a religious zealot. And the comic book company in that second decade of the 21st century was not alone. Anywhere you look, you can see this religious zealotry in action. A billion-dollar company that makes piss-poor shaving razors pours millions of dollars into the creation and marketing of a commercial that portrays its core audience as fascist, misogynist child abusers. And then at the end of this commercial says, you can have the privilege of buying our crappy razors, but only if you clean up your act. You've got to be better. If you improve yourself morally before the eyes of God, then you can continue to buy our crappy razors. And in the next 2 quarters, that company lost north of $1 billion to customers who are not, under any circumstances, coming back. And, of course, that story generated all sorts of useful idiots who made YouTube videos saying, well, no, if you carry the one and you look at the second column here, no, those 2 events have nothing in common. No, the company went after its core audience and lost $1 billion. You have a giant multi-billion-dollar corporation that makes piss-poor light beer. Tastes like unimaginative lemonade and will not get you there no matter how much of it you drink. They make this product. Their marketing team knows perfectly well what their core audience is. They know perfectly well who drinks this swill. They have a marketing meeting in which they are deciding what kind of spokesperson they can have for this brand of piss-poor swill beer. And at that marketing meeting, the decision is made based on who that core audience will hate the most, not who they will like the most, like had been true for 17,000 years. Instead, it was the actual words that were said, taped at that meeting, were, who will they hate the most? Who will our core audience hate the most if that person holds up a can of our piss-poor swill beer? They picked that person, and in their next 2 quarters, they lost well north of $1 billion to customers who are never, under any circumstances, coming back. Why, you might ask, would a company do this? If their demographic research proves that they know who their target audience is, why would they want to do this? It's religious. It's Christian religious. It's fundamentalist. It's that those people are avatars of evil. They are evil. They are the worst people in the world. They are, say it with me now, literally worse than Hitler. So it's not a question of profits and losses. We don't care about making money. God, it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. That's all we care about. We care about entering heaven. We care about pleasing God. So we don't care about profits and losses. What we care about is scourging evil. And since the core of our buying demographic, our customers, disagree with us on 1 or 2 points of politics on Twitter, they are the enemy with a capital E. They are footstools of Satan. And we must scourge them. We must do anything that we can. We must burn our own houses. It doesn't matter if we live or die. Evil must be defeated. Again, this kind of thinking, all of which is recorded, there's no extrapolation here. There are examples of all of this on record. All this kind of thinking is only explainable in fundamentalist religious zealot terms. It certainly makes no sense in terms of commerce or capitalism. It makes no sense in terms of please the customer. It's the opposite of that. They made that decision, and they lost that money. Oh, same thing in Hollywood. What do people like? What do our core audience like? Well, whatever it is, find out exactly what it is they like and destroy it. But don't destroy it off camera. Desecrate it. You want to make sure they know you hate them. You want to make sure to desecrate this thing they love. Don't just subvert it. Mock it. Desecrate it. Bring him out in his fedora with his bullwhip, but have him humiliated for 2 whole hours. Have him humiliated the whole time. Have him a drunk or a loser or a fraud. Someone who in his 5th movie says, I've always been a fraud. Have him shown up by a take-charge girl boss who don't need no man and who can deck people with 1 punch, even though she's 5 feet tall. Have the savior of mankind, if he's a man, just have him shot in the head. The savior of mankind can't be a man named John. Now, instead, it's got to be a tiny little girl. It's got to be an actress who's 4 feet tall and who doesn't know anything about the franchise that the core audience loves. It's not a question of new blood. It's that we know who they are and we know what they'll hate. So do that. A group of adventurers in New York City who fight ghosts? Well, let's do some marketing research and find out what the core audience, the fans of that property, would most hate to see. Then craft that thing. And any assistant editor or whatever who pipes up, raises a hand at a story meeting and says, should we really be doing that? These people have been loyal fans forever. Should we really be doing that? They get fired. And they get fired in that meeting. They don't have to wait. They get walked to their desk out of that meeting. The result? A completely tanking industry. You can probably say it with me by now. Billions and billions of dollars lost in every quarter. A completely tanking industry. And why? We've gone over it already. Because there is no alternate audience. You had a core group of fans. One core group of fans. You don't have alternate core groups of fans just waiting to hand you money. Same thing with, let's say, a multi-billion-dollar corporation who has a very successful theme park in which employees dress up as their fantasy characters, the characters from their wonderful, beloved movies. First of all, you're going to refilm all of those movies and you're going to change them. Characters aren't going to look like they did before. And anyone who disagrees with that is part of that core audience of people who are horrible fascists who are, say it with me now, literally worse than Hitler. That's why you're making the change, specifically so they will hate it. You want to drive them away. Same thing with that theme park. What's the core group there? It's not quite the same core group. Here it's families. You've got a mother, a father, 2 little girls. Mother and father have been saving up for years to go to this unbelievably eye-wateringly expensive theme park, so that the kids can see their favorite characters cavorting around as if those characters were real. In 10 years, once upon a time, in 10 years, you would break it to those kids, of course, those characters aren't real. Those were actors in uniform. It was designed to give you a magical experience, and we would have paid any price to do that. Now, you can't tell those kids that. The little vape heads will sue you. But once upon a time, that was the natural progression. You take them there as a little kid, and they're amazed. They're amazed to see their favorite cartoon characters alive and walking around. Until you get to the entrance to Magic Mountain, when there is a portly, balding, bearded, 50-year-old man in a Cinderella dress. Because he gets to be a princess too. And because we know you're going to hate that. We know you're going to see that and think, all right, this has gone from being a really expensive but magical experience for my kids into pederasty inculcation. We've stepped from that living fantasy to give my kids a wonderful time into some balding, pot-bellied 50-year-old sexual fantasy, and I don't want anything of it. I'm going to turn around in line. We're going to leave. And we are never, under any circumstances, coming back. What is the result? I can't believe you guessed it. Tanking by billions of dollars in every quarter. Or the movie theaters. Here's the superhero. She's not the one you want. She's not the one you asked for. She's not the one you've ever said you liked. In fact, you've said in droves that you don't like her. Here are 2 more movies. What's the result? I made $10 a piece, the movies did. They cost $300 million, and then another $300 million for publicity, but they tanked. Completely tanked. It's a completely repeatable pattern, all in the second decade of the 21st century. It was only a matter of time when multi-billion-dollar corporations are burning money, just literally taking out $3 billion from their Swiss bank account and setting it on fire in the lobby. It's only a matter of time until that redounded to smaller fry. By the time the second decade of the 21st century rolled around, comics were definitely the smaller fry. Because of the first 2 factors. Nothing wrong with that. They were a healthy small fry. They had restricted themselves to niche bought-in customers, and they had restricted their distribution to where those niche bought-in customers would go. Okay, that is a kind of equilibrium. That will work. Unless you make a corporate decision to alienate that core group of customers who have been bought into your product for 50 years. Unless you make a corporate decision that they are the bad guys. Sure, Galactus and Doctor Doom are bad, but these core fans are much, much worse. And we're not going to leave it to inference for them to know this. We, the editors, are going to allow our writers and artists to call them that on social media, to call them out as that, to signal them, to at them on social media, make sure they know that you're literally worse than Hitler. We hate you. We absolutely hate you because of the 50 points of politics that we could discuss. There are 2 points on which you disagree with us. Well, that is the end of the world. That means you are living avatars of evil. And since our editors have abrogated any kind of responsibility, since they have not sat us down and said, you don't own these characters. You're their caretaker. So you want to change a thing here or there, you run it by me. But you don't change anything major. And you certainly don't change the nature of the character. You don't get to do that. You're a custodian of these characters. We want exciting stories from you so that these core groups of customers will keep going back to these niche stores and buying our product. But nothing more than that. The editors didn't say that. The editors didn't say you can't sloganeer. The editors didn't say you can't attack your fans. Instead, they were either silent or they joined right in. There was a bit of momentum built in, of course. We're talking decades of this core group of customers loving these comics. There was a bit of momentum built in where people still bought these things, still hoped, still thought, this can't be happening. This is 17,000 years of commerce. You don't do this to your customers. This can't be happening. Or if it's happening, it's some writer who's gone rogue and they'll be snapped down. Nope. That didn't happen. The Hulk? He's not a tortured scientist anymore. He's a cool teenager who loves being Hulk. Tony Stark? Iron Man? Yeah. Now, we're going to make him a fop and a drunk, and then we're going to have him ineptly killed, and then he'll just be a do-nothing ghost. But don't worry. There'll still be a technological genius in the Marvel Universe, but it'll be a black girl who's a teenager, and she will have an enormous afro, and at one developmental meeting, and in Marvel Comics, again, on record, because these people think they're the soldiers of the Lord, so they record everything they do for posterity, when they will all have parks named after them. At one meeting, an artist said, here's what I'm thinking of for Riri Williams, and an editor said, not a writer, but an editor said, no, make the afro bigger. They'll really hate that. Intentionally targeting a cartoonish version of their core audience with the goal of making them hate what you're doing so that they don't ever come back. We hate you. We don't want you buying our comics. We don't want you. If you don't like my politics, don't buy my book. Stan Lee would have shot someone who said that. He would have taken his old World War II Luger out of his drawer and shot that person. If you don't like my politics, don't buy my book. You know, what do hot dogs taste like? The infamous example. Mayonnaise and bigotry. Go after those readers. Marvel Comics started doing that in droves. Hulk? No, he's just a cool Asian teen. Iron Man? Well, it's not Iron Man anymore. Men are toxic. It's Iron Heart. And she's Foxy Brown. She's got an enormous afro, so she'd be completely blind if she put a helmet on her head. And so on and so forth. Wolverine? An avatar of traditional toxic masculinity. What is he? He's in a threesome. With Jean Grey and Storm? Oh no. With Jean Grey and Cyclops. He's in a threesome with Jean Grey and Cyclops. And they're all evil plant people anyway. And racial segregationists and racial superiorists. That's the X-Men. Do we want to move on from there? What about Thor? Well, he's a drunk, and he's a multiple amputee. At least one time, one part of his body that he doesn't have anymore lost through his own ineptitude. He accidentally cut it off. And he doesn't have his hammer anymore because he's not worthy. Instead, there's a woman wielding his hammer. What's her name? Her name is Thor. She takes his name. Not just his powers and his hammer, but his name, as if it were an office, as if he were a regional vice president. She takes his name. Complete character erasure. She is Thor. And I always have been. Didn't you notice? What about Captain America, you might say? 2 words. Hail Hydra. And so on and so forth. The doomed planet Krypton, the valiant scientist Jor-El warning the Science Council, this planet will explode. Oh no, he lived, and he's evil, because he's a man. Superman has a little boy with Lois Lane. At long last, a perfectly natural progression of the storyline. A major change that was thought over and done wonderfully. Superman and Lois Lane become parents to a little boy. And then Superman lets him go off in space with his crazy, demented father, and when he comes back, he's a teenager. Why? Because at editorial boards, the powers that be who think these characters are theirs to do with what they please said, we want Superman to be gay. Okay, it can't be Clark Kent. So let's age up his son, call him Superman, and make him gay. For some reason, these religious zealots, who seemed to believe that 4-year-olds can know their own sexuality, weren't comfortable with making a 5-year-old gay. Instead, it has to be a teenager who comes back gay. Very gay. They did. So they could say, we made Superman gay. And so on and so forth. The characters who weren't race swapped or sexuality swapped were made into ineffectual tools. So those lame-ass backup characters in Captain Marvel Jr., they get their own comic books, but they are forever failing. They're drug addicted. They're dumb. They're men. What do you expect? It's the women who will save the day. Despite the fact that female niche comic book fans who were going to those comic shops were writing in and writing letters and blogging saying, sorry, this kind of so-called equality I do not need. This is pandering. Didn't matter. And the reason it didn't matter is because the people who were running this thing, we would call them showrunners if they were tanking a beloved TV series or a beloved TV property, but in here we'll call them editors and writers, are religious zealots. They're on a mission from God. So they don't care what people say. They don't care whether or not they lose money. They don't care whether or not they fail, whether or not it's all fraudulent. They don't care about any of that. All they care about is being on the right side of history when the trumpet sounds at the Last Judgment. They're religious zealots. There's no speaking to them. There's no reasoning with them. There's also no compromising with them. If you have one of them in your staff, they have to be walked out of the building. You can't say, well, no, we're going to remove some of your responsibilities and contain you a little bit. We're not going to fire you. They have to be gone. They have to be completely gone. Because they don't care about anything else. Don't care about practicalities. Don't care about feeding their family. Don't care about paying their rent. Don't care about anything. They only care about God. And have convinced themselves that they are all as righteous as Jesus Christ. Maybe more so. Because he didn't have any female disciples. In the second decade of the 21st century, that was done to superhero comic books. With two exceptions. In Marvel and in DC, there are signpost characters in both. Traditional signpost characters, tentpole characters like the Fantastic Four, or Thor, or Superman, or Wonder Woman. But in both Marvel and DC, there are live wire, third rail properties. Things that have never not been popular, things that make 90% of the money. And somewhere at the heart of DC and Marvel Comics, somebody must still be sane, because those live wires have not been touched. In Marvel, it's Spider-Man, and in DC, it's Batman. Those live wires have not been touched in either company. Plain and simple. There have been all sorts of talk from those writers who are allowed to stay employed, even though they blackmail and slander their own editors on social media to thousands of people. They have complained, saying, Peter Parker, I mean, come on. It's obvious, isn't it? Him and Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four. I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Didn't you notice? And there's been similar talk about Batman, but those are absolutely non-negotiable. They are the things that make money. So they are not touched. Everything else, totally up for grabs. In other words, totally down the toilet. Which means that core audience going all the way across town, sometimes to the next town over, to that specialist comic shop, which is the only place they can get comic books that they have loved for decades and that they are willing to spend their spare money on. Most of those people have grown older with the industry. And unless they're book reviewers, as they've grown older, they've had more disposable income. They're willing to drive to two towns over to the comic shop in order to buy these things. They get there, and what do they find? The villain of the issue is them. Not somebody who looks like them. It actually has their name. Somebody on social media hacked their social media account, and they are the villain of the issue. And the editorials and the screeds on social media are not ambiguous. The creators of these things are saying, we hate you. We absolutely hate you. Sure, Galactus and Doctor Doom are bad, but the real villains here are you. You're the villains here. We hate you. We want you gone as our customers so that you can clear the way for our alternate audience who won't go anywhere near a comic shop because they're afraid of running into your Nazi ass. Except you're not Nazis, and there is no alternate audience. There is no alternate audience. When you jump off that cliff, nothing will stop you from hitting the rocks below. As a result, 2,000 sales, 3,000 sales, 8,000 sales, maybe. As a result, an industry that then takes to the industry journals and says, oh, the whole industry's dying. No, people just don't read comics anymore. No, that's not true. People read manga in droves. Why? Well, Manga is new and different. Manga is far more accessible. You know exactly where to start with a series. Manga is everywhere. It's not in specialty shops only. It's in bookstores as well. It's in libraries in droves. And also, I don't know if Mike will stress this point, but I want to stress it. Manga doesn't hate you. Manga doesn't say you are the worst thing in the world. You are literally worse than Hitler. Manga doesn't hate its audience. I say that doesn't mean anything. I think that means more than anything. I think that means more than accessibility, more than price, more than availability. And I think that means more than anything. What the Marvel and DC, the two superhero comic book companies, did in the second decade of the 21st century was tell their core audience to take a hike. And as a result, like every other example we have seen, what happens in their next 2 quarters, the next 10 quarters, the next 20 quarters? It's not billions lost because they didn't have billions, but it's everything lost. It's everything. It's an industry tanked. With people who, and I hate to say this, I'm not 100% sure this is true, unlike with the swill beer or the crappy razors. I'm not 100% sure this is true, but I'm still going to say that audience is never coming back. They will never trust you again. And they don't have any reason to. The only way that Marvel and DC could be trustworthy again for that audience, I believe that audience might come back. But there's one thing they would have to see first, and that is everybody fired. Everybody who's anywhere connected with this, they can't be there. One thing I know for sure, if you work in an environment like this, you might be able to confirm it. You cannot work around these people. You have to walk them out the door. They don't care about likability at work. They don't care about whether or not they're getting threats. They don't care about whether or not they've cost the company hundreds of thousands or millions or billions of dollars. They only care about their mission from God. That's all they care about. So, and that's never going to change. So you have to get them out. You have to go to their desk and say, you made the Submariner gay in the last issue. I wasn't paying attention because I was, snorting coke in my office. I'm going to fire you right now. No delay. I don't care what kind of grievance account you go on social media. You can't post on our social media anymore as of right now. And all your locks, your key cards have been changed. Pack up your box and go. And Ralph here from security is going to walk you out the door. Don't come back and don't try applying anywhere else in the industry because we're all talking to each other and none of you can have a job here. That's what has to happen. Not to one person, but to all of them. To everyone who was involved. Writers, artists, inkers, colorers, sub-editors, editors, anybody who's involved in this needs to be gone. Just start with a clean slate. Start with a whole bunch of new people. If Marvel and DC did that, and all of a sudden, the purse puppy nonsense, the race swapping, the incessant gender swapping, the incessant establishment that every single comic book character, with the sole exception of Spider-Man and Batman, is gay, if that all changed, if Marvel let it be known, if some of these, maybe get some new people in PR to go on social media and let the fans know, we've started, you don't have to vilify anybody who's come before. You can just say, we've started in a new direction. This is the Fantastic Four you remember. This is the Justice League you remember. This is the Avengers you love. This is not Carol Danvers and some guest stars, all of whom are the progressive stack. This is instead the Avengers you remember, and what a story we have to tell you. Oh my God, it is so good. You're going to love it. If Marvel and DC did that, I believe that fans would come back. Not the whole number. Some of them are gone forever. But I believe enough of them would come back to keep a lot of those niche comic book stores in business and to keep floppy comics, the weekly, monthly comics, a going concern. A minor, modest going concern, but still a going concern. If that were done, I believe that would happen. If that is not done, that will not happen. Simple as that. It's if or. And that shows no signs of being done. Which means that these ideologues, these God-bothering ideologues, are just going to run this whole thing into the ground. They already mostly have. Which means that the answer to the overarching question that we asked 2 hours ago, are floppy comic books doomed, is yes. Yes, they are. Unless Marvel and DC completely clean house of zealots, these are doomed. Yeah. They might limp on. Maybe you make a graphic novel now and again. Maybe you make a special thing now, a square-bound thing now and again. Not a floppy comic, not coming out once a month. But not other than that. Maybe the square-bound things, you could maybe sell them in bookstores to a general audience. I think the general audience will still be repulsed. The minute they open it, they'll be repulsed. Those writers and editors and artists that you have can't do anything that isn't repulsive to normal people. But maybe just a little, I don't know. But as it is now, no. Absolutely not. No one wants this crap. because the core audience you've told to take a hike. You've told your core audience, you're monsters. We hate you. You're on the wrong side of history. And there isn't an alternate audience, which leaves you nowhere. Leaves you precisely nowhere. A few hangers-on here and there who will stubbornly go to the comic shop and buy this stuff, hoping that it's just a bad patch. All of us long-term comic book readers have had bad patches in comics before. Oh, I can't believe they put George Tuska on Conan the Barbarian. It goes. It comes and then it goes. And you get a great run for your patience. This is not that. This is religious zealotry. So it's not going anywhere. Those holdover fans, I was one for a long time, even on this channel, but they're getting spat on and they're getting garbage for what they do. So that's not going to help. That's not going to save things. The only thing that will work here is house cleaning. And I don't think that's going to happen. Which means, unbelievably, that I will see the final monthly issue of Action Comics, of Superman, of the Justice League. I will see the final issue of that. The character might still have further adventures, but not in a monthly comic book that you can buy for whatever they cost now. I saw a harbinger of that with the Legion of Superheroes in DC Comics. The Legion of Superheroes is a team of teenage superheroes 1,000 years in the future. They have a rabid fan base, as rabid as comic book fan bases get. Legion fans are more loyal than any kind of fan. They'll buy anything. They'll support anything. And DC Comics, in the second decade of the 21st century, gave a relaunch of Legion Comics to a religious zealot, to someone who's only on a mission from God. He couldn't care less about writing, couldn't care less about the comic or the property. He's just on a mission from God. Every Legionnaire was race swapped. All of them have 2 mommies or 2 daddies. All of them have gratuitous nakedness, forced swearing, all the hallmarks of these horrible vandals. It was chock full of those. There was nothing, almost nothing recognizable that wasn't that. Every Twitter checkbox that you could think of crammed into the very first issue, let alone every other issue. And it failed. A brand new full-color Legion of Superheroes launch, and it failed. The Legion fans said, I'm not gonna read this crap. No. These aren't yours to do with whatever you want. You are a caretaker of the product of better writers than you. So no, I'm not going to do it. Sales tanked. After 2 issues, sales tanked. And again, there were useful idiot apologists saying, well, it might have been that the artist changed, or I don't know, maybe the industry, nobody likes Legion anymore. No. All of the examples are the same. All of the examples are the same. You swap out, you pursue this religious agenda, and you are going to take a bath at the cash till. You're going to kill what you're doing. Whatever it is you're doing this to, you're going to kill it. It's happened all across the board, in industry, in marketing, in utilities, in sports, in movies, in TV, in cable, and in comics. So that's the answer to the question. It's not nobody buys comics anymore. The industry's changing. The times are changing. No, it's not that. It's that the 2 foremost superhero comic book companies intentionally drove away their audience thinking they had an alternate audience. And they didn't. And now they're finding that out. Now they're paying the price. Now they're in a dying industry that they killed. So there you go. So there's 50 minutes of ranting on the subject of, are floppy comic books doomed? They are, but not for any natural reason. They could have continued. That equilibrium situation that I described going into the 21st century could have lasted. Plenty of other niche industries have lasted with exactly that equilibrium. True, the rest of the world is not seeing our product, but the people who will buy our product are seeing only our product. And that is enough. That is good enough to keep us in business. That would have worked until religious zealots got a hold of it all. So it's very intentional. It's not impersonal forces of the industry, certainly not COVID. It's that. It's that religious zealots got a hold of this industry and told its core audience, we hate you. We absolutely hate you. No industry can survive that, and this one hasn't. So there you go. The end. I'm sure that our topic next week will be happier. Thank you, BookTube.